I want to thank you so much for joining us in a virtual version of the Leadership Lab. Not what we had planned, but that's kind of the way life is going these days. I want to just start by acknowledging the tremendous changes that have taken place in our world in the past few months and that have really shaken up your work as educators, and just say how appreciative we are and how in awe we are of the resiliency and creativity that you've been showing in continuing to meet the needs of students in Washington. So it's been a really tough time, and the tough isn't over. And we so appreciate what you have been bringing to our students. I'd also like to give a shout out to Nosway and to Erin Marswick and Lindsay Stevens of CSTP for coordinating this leadership lab, making it happen. And also to the team from Vancouver High School in the Vancouver School District, who will be sharing their stories with you today. I also want to specifically recognize Lane Manning of the Vancouver School District, who has been a champion of Dr. Stembridge's work for several years and who really helped me to see the power of that work. I first had the chance to hear Dr. Stembridge speak at the WIRA conference in 2018, and he shared stories of teachers setting rigorous high bars for student learning that took into account not just what students need to know and need to be able to do, but also how they feel. And then videos of students articulating that empowering learning. So I'm always wearing my TPEP hat, and I had it on that day, and I thought, wow, this could really change how we think about student growth goals and take it from, you know, these kind of trivial, insignificant learnings to really powerful learnings for students. And what I know now, having worked with Dr. Stembridge for several months, is that I was both right and wrong. And certainly what he shares can greatly impact how we think about student growth goals. But that's really just the beginning of the power of this work. When we start to think about, when we do think about the opportunity gaps that students are experiencing, we also think about the systems that perpetuate these gaps: school funding, discipline, master schedules, attendance and grading systems. What stands out for me is that the framework Dr. Stembridge describes for culturally responsive education, the 6 themes, the 5 planning questions, these things are focused laser-like on the classroom. And this is so powerful because while we know that racist institutions and systems must become more equitable, and we can't let up on our pressure to make that happen, this doesn't happen overnight. However, culturally responsive teachers engage and empower students right now, despite institutions and systems that might be perpetuating these gaps. So I'm really grateful to Dr. Stembridge's work and for that of the teachers and the administrators who have been engaging in it so deeply with him. I am so thrilled that you will be able to learn more about this today. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Stembridge to you. He's an education consultant focusing on equity-focused school improvement, and he's been the director of the Center for Strategic Solutions and the Transformation of Schools at NYU. He has also written this amazing book, which I hope you will get your hands on as soon as you possibly can. He led the teacher residencies that you're about to hear about today, and with all of the different leadership positions that he's held, the initiatives that he's been in charge of, the amazing things he's written and developed, I think one of the things that I most appreciate about him is that he brings to this work a teacher heart and a teacher lens, and is just focused squarely on the classroom. And I know you'll learn more about that today. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Dr. Stembridge.
You're muted.
All right. I was saying some really profound things. I'll try and say them again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really excited about having the opportunity for us to spend a couple of hours together. I still wish that we were together in one physical space, shaking hands, sharing germs, you know, being up close and personal with each other. But I'm really appreciative of Naswe and Sue and everyone else who went into making sure that we still have the opportunity to come here today and put some brain power together. So I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so kind of just fleshing out the residency model. I'm talking about the residency model, but it's impossible for me to talk about the residency model without also talking about the mental model, the framework of culturally responsive education that I use in my work with teachers and school teams. So the residency model, if I just start there, it was, you know, residencies are something that we do sometimes in education, but I really first started honing in on this model when I read the book Better by Atul Gawande. Atul Gawande is one of my favorite writers, and he's a surgeon. I think he's a chief surgeon at Boston General Hospital. And he wrote this whole book about how doctors are continuously learning and improving their craft, and the doctors that become the best versions of their doctor selves in terms of their knowledge and skills in meeting the needs of patients are typically able to do so when they are collaborating with other doctor minds who are also looking at the needs of the patient and thinking about what serving those needs requires of them as doctors. So it was Better, that book Better, that first got me thinking about, okay, well, what would a residency model look like in my work with teachers? In terms of my work with teachers, yes, I was the director of the Center for Strategic Solutions in the Metro Center at NYU. Before then, I was a senior research associate at NCREST, the National Center for Restructuring Education, Schools, and Teaching at Teachers College, Columbia University. And then before that, I was the director of an initiative, the Collaborative for Public School Education at American University in Washington, DC, which is also where I got my doctorate. And in all of those spaces, I was talking about working with teachers, teams of teachers, educators, district, school level administrators to figure out, what do we really mean by culturally responsive education? This idea that very few people can object to, right? This idea, as a matter of fact, am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to put my definition of culturally responsive education up on the screen here. Oops, wait a minute. Okay, you should see it now. Do you see it? So this definition of culturally responsive education that's you know, in the book, very difficult to object to. You know, who wouldn't want to create learning experiences that give conceptual context for policies and practices without marginalizing students, right? Who wouldn't want to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate their competence by drawing on their identity? I think that's really one of the key ideas that I try to work with, this idea that in order for us to say that our teaching and learning is truly responsive, inclusive, we have to give kids opportunities to connect their knowings, their experiences, their backgrounds, what they understand. We can't teach our students as if they're empty-headed vessels. We have to connect the big ideas, the essential knowings that we want for them with what it is they already know. That's culturally responsive education. Very few people are going to say that's a bad thing. The problem, as I saw it, was that many teachers had a hard time figuring out, okay, beautiful definition, beautiful idea. Now, how do I actually do that? And for me, what I began to realize is that even for the most well-meaning learner, and my learners are teachers, it's hard to apply a nuanced understanding like this into our practice without having a space where in real time we can start to apply and reflect on what we're seeing, what we're doing. You know, Gloria Latson-Billings says this is the operationalizing of an understanding. And so the residency became a model in which we could figure out, okay, if we believe these ideas, if these are things that we say we should be doing in our teaching and learning, how can we plan for it? Let's go in and try it. When we try it, let's then step back and then reflect. And when we reflect, we're not reflecting from a judgmental perspective. We're reflecting from the place of what was working for kids. What are the snapshots of engagement? How did we know that students were engaged? What did we see? What did we hear? What can we point to? And then from those snapshots of engagement, we back away and we say, okay, now what does this require of us? In my work, and I'm gonna move a slide forward here, I been, asking this question for about, now about 13 years. The book, CRE in the Classroom, I composed most of it in the summer of 2018. So at that point, I'd been thinking about this stuff, working with teachers for about 11 years. Here's the beautiful thing about working with teachers. When you're in an intimate space and you're really talking about teaching, teachers will call you on expletive deleted, right? They will say, that sounds really cool, but I got a classroom full of kids who don't always go for, the instructional models that I bring to them. So, love what you're saying. How do you actually do it? And for me, over the course of about 10 years, the 6 themes of CRE that I write about in the book in chapter 3, these were really chunks of the bigger idea of culturally responsive education that logistically first came about because I was trying to chunk out a large series of professional development sessions. And so I just needed to kind of like segment it so that I could present it to teachers in a way that wouldn't be overwhelming. So you have relationships, cultural identity, vulnerability, assets, rigor, engagement. And what I say is that this is the vocabulary of CRE. These themes, if we're talking about them with a shared understanding in the right way, then we're probably talking about the right things. We're probably considering what we need to consider in order to provide the most inclusive and fairest opportunities for everyone. So the 6 themes, they've basically been around in this form since about 2013. And then spending time with teachers, again, teachers who, when it's just us and we're in a room, teachers, are like, I don't care, how important other people think you are, like, all right, can you give me something that's going to help me to be a better teacher in my classroom? And what we would do is we use the 6 themes, study them, think about them deeply, and then design learning experiences. And so I started doing this probably around 2011, 2010, 2011. And what I would do is that as we develop learning experiences, when they were successful, we come back and we reflect in our planning room, and everybody's kind of jazzed at that point, right? Because you're like, oh, wow, that actually worked. That was good. I can do that again. That felt manageable. And it's, for any teacher, it's inspiring when you see a kid who's not always engaged, right? I mean, for me, these are like I feel high when this happens, right? I'm like buzzed and juiced up. It's great when that happens on a Friday, because then that energy carries you all throughout the weekend. But when we saw kids engaged, we would ask ourselves, what did we talk about in our planning space? How did we organize the learning experience in a way that allowed for the engagement that we saw? And over about 5 years or so, I settled on these 5 planning questions. What do we want students to understand? What do we want students to feel? What are the targets for rigor? What are the indicators for engagement? What are the opportunities to be responsive? And what I found was that if we ask those questions, not necessarily in that order, that's why they're not numbered, but when we ask those questions thoughtfully, and we have working definitions for the 6 themes in our mind, we are more likely to develop learning experiences that work well for all of our students. What I found is that when I use this mental model, the 6 themes and the 5 planning questions, even on the days where I don't think I hit a home run, I never strike out. I always am able to connect my students in a way that there's traction for the next learning experience. So the residencies are an opportunity where we can marry these theoretical kind of definitions, right? These abstract ideas with the practical tools of our pedagogical toolkit. And in the residency, we get a chance to just kind of sit at that intersection. That's why I got that equity and pedagogy, those overlapping circles there on the screen, right? Because I think of equity, the equity questions that we ask in our work are the questions about whom. Whom are we teaching? What are our students' assets? What do they need? How are they likely to perceive this opportunity of school? Whom? Whom? The equity questions that we ask are about whom we are teaching. The pedagogy questions that we ask are about how. And to ask one absent of the other is woefully insufficient. If you only are asking equity questions and not pedagogy questions, it's hard to figure out, what do I do? I'm thinking about whom. I can love my students, I can think very highly of them, I can have great relationship with them, but I don't know how to teach them to master these high-level content concepts that I need for them to know. Whereas conversely, if I'm asking pedagogy questions without thinking about equity, then, you know, there's a slippery slope there where if I teach, you know, I'm Black, so I often, you know, make reference specifically when I'm talking about ethnic groups to Black people, but I think that this is broadly applicable. If I design a learning experience and it works really well with one Black kid, and then I'm not thinking about the whom, the equity question, I'm just locked in on the pedagogy question, and that same learning experience doesn't work well with another Black kid, then I can give myself permission, if I'm thinking about pedagogy and not equity, I can give myself permission to say, well, this Black kid is obviously broken. Because the learning experience worked for that other Black kid, but this Black kid, it's not working. What do you want me to do with this Black kid, Dr. Stembridge? I've tried what we did successfully with this other group of students. No good, no go for this one. When are we going to just go ahead and admit that we can't fix this kid? All right, so we have to be in a space where we are open and available to both considerations, equity and pedagogy. And then the other powerful thing I think happens in the residency is that teachers get to center their thinking, their design efforts around their specific questions. Oftentimes in the residency, one of the first things that I try to do is I try to ask teachers, why are you here? What do you want to accomplish? If at the end of this residency, if we do this really, really well, if this is a success by any measure, what will you be able to say walking out of here? And then I try to listen to what teachers are saying and then make sure that I'm directing them to be able to make the connections that will resonate best for them. What I've learned about these 6 themes of CRE is it doesn't really matter where you start. All right, so, you know, here's one of the rules of equity. You got to be able to talk about race. I'm Black, I've been Black my whole entire life. Let me tell you something that I've learned about being a Black educator going into often predominantly white spaces, talking about equity. A lot of times, white people shy away from some of the, you know, the more sensitive parts of the conversation. And they don't always shy. I'm not saying that they're shying away because they are afraid of revealing that they're secretly, you know, racist. I think that for a lot of people, it's hard to talk about race. And you want to be careful to make sure that in talking about race, asking honest questions, thinking deeply about something that can be challenging to think about, people want to make sure that they don't end up stumbling and in their articulation and saying something that makes them sound like a bad person. Okay, I get it. And yet, that cannot be the thing that prevents us from leaning into these conversations. And so the 6 themes, what I find a lot of times is that people they'll sometimes be like, oh, I'm not letting this Black guy bring me into a conversation around cultural identity. I know where that's going. So what we'll do is we'll talk about rigor. Yep, rigor's safe. We can talk about rigor. But you can't talk about rigor if you really understand rigor without thinking about identity. My favorite cognitive scientist, a lot of you guys know this, is Mary Helen Imordino-Yang. She's at the University of Southern California. One of the things that she says is that it is impossible, neurologically, biologically impossible to think deeply about anything that you absolutely do not care about. And so when we're talking about rigor, and rigor is not about memorization, rigor is not about regurgitation, rigor is not even content dependent, because I was a high school English teacher. I love teaching Shakespeare, love teaching Chaucer, love teaching, some of the traditional canon. I love teaching African American and Latinx literature too. But when I'm teaching some of this, literature that we think of as traditionally rigorous, if I'm only asking students to, tell me in a multiple choice format to match, a character's name with the description of a character, that is not a rigorous way of thinking about the text. And it's going to be much harder for my students to gain an appreciation to see themselves in the text until and unless I give them the opportunity to make their own connections. All right, it's them being able to ask and answer for themselves why this is important, what this is like, what this makes me think of, what this reminds me of. When I can mine that kind of thinking from my students, if then I'm teaching them something worthwhile, I have an opportunity to connect them in a way where they can make the understandings their own. So the residency model is this space where we've been able to, find the meeting place of the theory and the practice. I think the other thing, we got a lot of Fort Vancouver High School people here today that you're going to be able to hear from. I love Fort Vancouver High School for a couple of reasons. The main reason why I love Fort Vancouver High School is because of the students, because this is one of the schools that I really like, right? So these are the kids who, if you give them a good learning experience and they read your authenticity, and that's part of their asset, right? Part of the asset of kids at a school like Fort Vancouver High School is that they're really good at reading the authenticity of adults. If you think about it, they have to be good at reading the authenticity of adults, because there are some adults who will bring them harm if they aren't able to read them as a threat. So once kids are able to see the authenticity of the adults, to feel like this is a trustworthy space, if we give them something rich, something groovy to think about, and if we are intentional about leveraging the affective environment, the feeling that we want for them, we've seen Fort Vancouver High Schools, right? Kids that, this is a school that some people would say is not as high performing as a school where the overwhelming population is, from a higher demographic. We hear and see the most brilliant thinking from our kids. But what I love about them is that if you're not ready, a Fort Vancouver High School will cuss you out. All right. And here's the thing, is when a kid cusses you out, if you're a wise teacher, the first thing you should be thinking about is, oh, this learning experience is not working for this kiddo. Let me consider what's another way to engage this kiddo so that they see themselves and see this learning experience as worthy of their investment. So the residency is a space where we get to flesh that out, play a little bit. When we're doing the residency for me, and I always encourage coaches, write yourself into the design of the learning experience. One of the things that I found with my work with teachers is that when teachers see me as a teacher themselves, they're more inclined to get, super real with me, including the connections that they're making for their own practice, and also offering up their most honest feedback, most honest pushback against what we're discussing. And for me, as a facilitator of teachers' understandings, teacher pushback is an essential part of that transaction. If a teacher does not feel like they're able to ask their question, to push back in the way that they need to push back, then oftentimes what will happen is a well-behaved teacher will just check out. When I was a teacher, when I sat in professional development, that did not seem like it was offering me tools that would give me a chance to be more successful, especially in the classes where I didn't feel a great deal of success. Sorry, Kurt, sorry for all the principals in the room. I was the teacher who started grading. I started grading during the PD. And what I did was I would grade in the front row so that everyone knew, this professional development's not working for me. I'm not going to yell out and, and get written up about it. Although I was written up when I was a teacher, but I'm kind of proud of it, actually. That's another story I'll tell you about it some other time. But when I didn't feel like I could ask my questions, center my thinking, then it was hard to keep me sustained. So typically, however much time we have with our residencies, it always follows a certain format. We begin with some kind of a content discussion, meaning our CRE content. We are thinking about either doing a deep dive in one or more of the themes. You know, it's always theme related generally, or we might, you know, really unpack one of the questions, make sure we're super clear about what the questions are asking us. So like, for example, the first question, what do you want your students to understand? There's a dream exercise that I write about in the book that we use to unpack that question, what do you want your students to understand? Because when you go deeply and you pare away, right, you pull away the different layers of the understanding and you get to the heart of what it is you want your kids to know. And you have to think about it like this, and we talk about this in our residencies. An understanding, a knowing, a true understanding is something that changes you fundamentally. If you think about something that you understand now, that you did not understand 10 years ago, if you can put your finger on that understanding, I understand this now, I did not understand this 10 years ago, a philosopher might say that you are a different person given that understanding. So the understanding allows us to find an accessible knowing, a knowing that our students will be able to connect with and then extend. And in the centering of ourselves around that knowing, a couple of things happen. One is we're likely to consciously and non-consciously identify some of the implicit biases that we're bringing to bear about this understanding, about our students as knowers of this understanding, right? Because there are some understandings that we all share, but we perform these understandings differently. And so our implicit bias might inhibit our students' learning if we are non-consciously or consciously expecting an understanding to look a specific way. If you just thought about that, the way you expect an understanding to look, there's tons of culture in that. Tons of background, indoctrination, social context that shows up in how we expect someone to perform an understanding. I could say a whole lot about that. I'm from the Bronx. The way that you demonstrate respect in the Bronx is way different than how I demonstrate respect at AERA, right? It's respect. It's that understanding is nonetheless the same, but the performance of that understanding is very much determined by the social and cultural norms of a specific space. So the residency gives us this chance to play with the these big ideas, and you know, one of the words that I love, it shows up in the book very often, I first saw it in the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings, operationalize. How do we operationalize these understandings that we have? Because here's the thing, you can know every strategy ever known to man for how to teach math, but if you don't know your kids, it ain't gonna work, right? If your kids don't trust you, if you don't like your kids, you think you're hiding it from everyone else, right? You think you're hiding it, but we know, your colleagues know, more importantly, your kids know. You can know everything about how to teach math and not be successful. Similarly, you can love your kids. You can love them. You can be an anti-racist person. You can be a person whose whole life, your personal doctrine leads you to abide by the golden rule and to honor people's individual gifts. But if you don't know how to teach math, it's going to be a real loving space where kids fail math. And so we got to be able to bring these two together. And then again, right, in many schools, but I'm thinking about Fort Vancouver High School because there's so many teachers from this building and administrators from this building represented here. And I think Fort Vancouver High School is very much kind of representative of where a lot of schools in America are right now, especially in districts that are becoming increasingly more diverse. The thing about Fort Vancouver High School kids and other schools as well is that once your students see you as trustworthy and see you as credible, and you know, I always tell my students, you're done when I know that you know that I love you. When I know that I love you, then whereas before I would accept 2 drafts for your English paper, now, 4 drafts. Because now I know I can push your learning and push your rigorous thinking without the fear of alienating you in terms of our personal relationship. And so these are things that are hard sometimes just to kind of talk about, certainly from a podium or even in a book, but in a residency space, we get a chance to really flesh that out, and teachers get to ask their questions and make their connections and have their own ahas. And then once a teacher has their own aha, just like a kid, that aha is theirs forever. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to be jumping in and listening in on the conversation, and then I'm going to make some notes about some things that I can say toward the end of this. But I'm super appreciative of everyone for joining, and looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Yemi. And for all participants, you will get to engage with Yemi. So keep those questions coming in your head. There will be an opportunity to talk with him at the end. So before we launch into Vancouver talking about their story and their journey with Yemi and utilizing his mindset and frame of thinking around this work, I just want to give you a little snippet about Leadership Labs. We've been doing Leadership Labs for quite some time. I wish that we were ingenious enough to have invented this idea, but we are not. We took it from somebody else, made a version of it. So Leadership Labs, where we first came into connection with Leadership Labs, was the Obama administration with Arne Duncan would go out, he would send his staff out to do some deep dive work into certain districts and schools where they had found some interesting practices happening, and they would do a leadership lab. Face-to-face leadership labs, we would actually be doing a fishbowl opportunity. There would be the idea would be shared among people in a fishbowl with the audience on the outside, and then you would flip the fishbowl and the audience would come into the center talking about what they heard. Unfortunately, we do not have really that opportunity to do via Zoom, but we're trying it out. We're trying to make this happen, and we appreciate you hanging on with us as we move this to a virtual platform. So as you listen to folks talk today, we just encourage you to think about ways in which you can hear what they say and contextualize it for your setting. We know that everywhere across our state, we have different buildings, different cultures, different people working, different students we're connecting with. And we just encourage you to find those nuggets where you might be able to take that and make it happen in your setting. Before we move too far, I would like to do just a little bit of housekeeping. The presenting team is going to unmute themselves and be talking, and just for the sake of background noise and everything else, if all participants could mute your mics, that would be great. And then there will be an opportunity later where we will go into role-alike groups and you will be able to talk. The chat is open. You are welcome to chat it up in the chat. If you have questions, you may want to table them as you hear the presenting team talk, Vancouver folks talk. They may answer some of your questions as you go through, as they go through their discussion. And then a reminder, the Leadership Lab is being recorded. We will send you that information. If you run into any technical difficulties during this Zoom, Erin in our office is the go-to person. That is her email. You can also find her on the chat if you need to connect with her about that. All right, so I'm very excited to present to you the Vancouver team. These people have graciously worked with me to be a part and really create this Leadership Lab experience, despite all the other things, I won't say the expletive, going on. So I just want to say a big thank you to them for just going with it despite all the change that is happening on a very regular basis, and on top of their already full plates happening. So I really appreciate that. They're going to do their introductions first. We're going to do a mic check as they do their introductions. We're going to start with the top row. Lane, you're on first. If you could just give us a little bit about who you are, that would be great, and we'll move on to Allison. Thank you, Lane.
Terrific. Thank you. My name is Lane Manning. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Vancouver. I've been working in the curriculum department there for more than 20 years, and prior to that, I taught for about 10. I became the administrator of the department in about 2002, and actually am retiring at the end of June. Vancouver is, do you want me to give any background of the district, or do you want to wait until I get to my question?
Let's wait on that.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Allison.
All right, so I am Allison Dark, and I am currently the resource coordinator for international and world language programs in Vancouver. I actually started my career in Portland Public Schools, and I've been with Vancouver since 1996. So I'm finishing year number 24 in Vancouver. I was actually a high school teacher. I taught science and math, and then I've been an administrator since 2003. I've done a lot of things in that time, but now currently I'm supporting a lot of our programs at the district level, but then I also work at Fort supporting the Center for International Studies work.
All right, mic check, are we good? Okay, great. Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay Garcia. I am currently a teacher on special assignment in the curriculum department of Vancouver Public Schools. I'm the avid lead for the district, so I feel honored to be part of this CRE work, as equity is kind of always in the forefront of my mind. I've taught 4th graders all the way through 8th graders, and I've been in Vancouver now for 7 years. So excited to be a part of this group today.
Kurt, you're up.
All right, I'm Kurt Scheidel. I'm the principal at Fort Vancouver High School Center for International Studies. I'm completing my first year as principal at Fort Vancouver CIS. However, I've been 26 years educator, 9 in the classroom teaching math and English, 5 as an associate principal, and 13 now as a principal. 4 years at an alternative high school in Vancouver, and then 8 as a middle school principal. So, and then my first year at Fort. So that's kind of my deal. Husband, father of 2 grandkids, another one on the way. So good stuff.
All right, hi, I'm Elizabeth Prager. I am a teacher at Fort Vancouver High School, Center for International Studies. This is my 8th year teaching mostly upperclassmen social studies. I previously taught for 8 years at middle school, and I've been in the same region of the district, so I'm able to help those students for 16 years now. I'm excited to work with Yemi. He's been just really transformative in my own teaching practice, and I'm looking forward to sharing today with you all about some of the things we've learned and the changes that we're making here at Fort.
Okay, I think I got it off. Hi, I'm Luana Parno, and I also teach at Fort Vancouver High School. I have been a teacher for 12 years, and before that, I did every probably odd minimum wage job known to man while I was raising my kids. And I've been at Fort Vancouver all 12 years. I teach multiple levels of mathematics. I have one EL, English language learner math class that has 23 students, and they've all been in the country less than a year. I also teach 2 algebra intervention classes. I teach pre-calculus and calculus.
Great, thank you for those introductions. All right, we are going to start with the first question, and to those of you presenting, you can just jump in for your question. So Vancouver has worked with Yemi for 3 years now. What would you say is the district's vision for the work he's doing with your staff, with the practitioners in your district?
I would say that our district began really paying attention to the fact that we were not meeting the needs of all of our students the year prior to meeting Yemi, and I was just reflecting on when that was. I believe it was April of 2016. So some time ago, and we recognized that we were definitely not meeting the needs of all of our students and began engaging in different book study, looking at Zaretta Hammond's work, looking at a variety of sources to better prepare ourselves to meet the range of needs in our student community. And Vancouver is a part of a group called the Western States Benchmarking Consortium, and we happened to be visiting colleagues in Cherry Creek School District, where Yemi had been working with both Cherry Creek and Aurora school districts. And he was a guest and invited to the meeting that we were gathered there to be a part of. Prior to that time, as background, before TPEP, Vancouver had already begun to adopt the University of Washington's 5D framework. And the reason we were drawn to it was because of the focus on student engagement and student voice. And so as a district core value, as we think about how we meet the range of student needs, that was center in our minds. So then meeting Yemi in Cherry Creek, Colorado, we were able to talk with him about his work, about his view of thinking about themes of culturally responsive practice and the way that he uses questions to frame the planning process to create the learning experience for students. And then I think more significantly, in addition to talk, we were actually able to zoom into, or I don't believe it was Zoom, but to go into a classroom where Yemi had been teaching students. And this was live instruction that was occurring that we were observing. And what was so clear to my colleagues and I, the three of us who were there from Vancouver visiting, was the deep relationship, the effective response that he was having with students, the clear foundation and engagement with those students. It was as if they wanted to come through the screen and be with us in the room. And so the opportunity to observe this was really, I think, emotionally moving for the three of us who were there. And we thought, we have to create that in Vancouver. That has to be something that we can bring into our settings so that our students can have similar experiences. So the linkage again to our history with 5D, but then looking at a way to get better about student engagement and to think really deeply about what does that mean. One of the things that Yemi talks about a lot that moves me a great deal is the idea that our students won't be successful unless they know that their assets and their identity are valued in our schools, and that both their assets and their identity will serve as a foundation for them being successful as learners in our classrooms. And so that background makes, for me think and believe and feel about the work differently than anything I've thought about before. Yemi's work began working with our instructional leaders. We had him come and speak to principals and people with roles similar to mine, other leaders in the school district, for several sessions as a way of kind of building a sense of understanding for where this work needed to go. But it was always clear, and I had the privilege of getting to spend a lot of time talking to Yemi, his heart was going to be in the classroom. I'm watching the chat. That's not true. But it was always that as soon as we could have Yemi working with teachers so that we could influence the student experience, the sooner we could expect to see the kind of things begin to happen for Vancouver kids that we were after. So I've had the opportunity to watch the design process that Yemi facilitates with teachers, and you will hear from a couple of them today. But what I observe, having facilitated a lot of teachers in instruction, is that he opens up possibilities. A lot of times conversations about student learning begin with what we think our students are ready for. And I think we often underestimate that. And Yemi's focus is very much on what is possible. How do we open this up and take a leap of faith that our students can do more than we think they can? And so recently I had the chance to watch one of these processes, and you see the design of the lesson, you see ideas presented over the course of a day, and the planning process that I had a chance to be a part of was a full day of planning with a teacher team that was going to implement a lesson the next day. And you see them come up with an idea and then push each other, and then Yemi push them and ask a real critical question. Or one of the team that's also with us, Allison or Lindsay, would ask a critical question, kind of just break through thinking about limitations to make more opportunities available kids. And then the next day, the lesson is taught. There's a debrief following it, and there are ahas about what kids can do that we didn't know they could. And it's once you start to have that kind of experience, you realize that this is not about a set of strategies. It's not about learning how to use a graphic organizer or any sort of even PSYOP type process. It's more about the way that we're being in the work of education. It's what we believe about the kids that we work with and what's possible for them and who we bring every day that we walk into a school. Who are we bringing into the room with the children? So our vision would be to share this experience for as many of our educators as possible, and to foster a critical mass of people who have the kind of experience like we want students to have, which is really emotional and affective in nature, to where we're so moved to do things differently because we can see what is possible that we didn't see before. And so I'll tell you, we are actually, I was counting up the years, we are in our 4th year. This work we have some wonderful things that have been accomplished, but there's still so much more to do. Yemi's, I think, been in about 9 or 10 of our schools. There are schools that haven't gotten to work with him at all. And I don't think any of the schools that do work with him now are ready to let him go. So I want you all to know that this is a long-term engagement. This is a deep commitment to our growth in our beliefs and our values about education.
Thank you, Lane. I feel like I could do a mic drop after your talk. You're very eloquent about talking about that, and I can tell very passionate. So some of us have had, we've heard Yemi speak. Some of us may have read his book. And if you haven't, please do. And some of you, probably most of you, have heard other people talk about him. So this might be your first opportunity to engage with Yemi in this leadership lab. Can you tell us, Vancouver folks, how you, for people who aren't familiar, how you would explain his work?
Yeah, I will jump in here and let Elizabeth and Luana kind of follow up because they're the teachers and they have some really awesome things to share with you. I will first say that second only to the students that have impacted my life over my educational career, being part of this work is the second greatest honor that I have had in my professional career because of the people that I've interacted with and what I've learned. If I could explain CRE, it's about this mindset of equity that fiercely pursues pedagogical innovation. So we are constantly evolving our understanding of equity, of who we are as humans, who the students that we are entrusted with are as humans, the world that we live in. We are constantly pursuing greater understanding of that. And then the pursuit of that understanding drives us to take risks, pedagogical risks, take risk in our mindset, so that those two things, the overlap of equity and pedagogy, can just allow us to create experiences for all kids, our most vulnerable kids, but for all kids, that really just let them explode into becoming the best versions of themselves. It has been, again, a great honor to work with the two women that you're about to hear from, and the work that they've been able to do at Fort, and then several other schools in the district as well. So again, just the overlap of equity, that mindset that continues to evolve, and that fierce pursuit of like innovative pedagogy. And I'll just turn it over to the teachers now.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and, oh, Luana, you want to start? Go ahead.
Go for it. Okay, I guess when I was reflecting on this, there's a few major things that I wanted to share. First of all, the mental modeling that Yemi kind of takes you through, it, I think, allows teachers to create lessons that hold value for our students, but at the same time makes them feel valued, which gives them an opportunity to be elevated in the classroom. So then we're not imposing knowledge on them. They're bringing their cultural identities and their backgrounds and their experiences, which are super rich, and then they're infusing the whole lesson and the whole class. They are sort of the teachers of each other, and it sort of forces teachers to let go of some control in the classroom because they've worked so hard to create the lesson. They feel confident that it's rigorous enough and it's not just gonna, you know, go places it shouldn't. But I think the most important piece is that for me, and when I think about it, it really pushes teachers to create valuable lessons that value the students. So it's like this lovely reciprocal piece. And when I think of cultural responsive education, that word responsive, I mean, the other two, of course, are super important, but that's our opportunity. That word responsive, that's where we get to step in, and it's like a gift for us, to tell you the truth, because we're able to sort of look at, you know, gaps that our students have in achievement and try to fill those gaps, you know, with these lessons in a way that doesn't make them feel like they have gaps. There's a term we use a lot when we're doing sort of math lessons, and it's like low floor, high ceiling activities. And these are very much that way. So any student can enter in and feel like they have a wealth of knowledge, which is super important.
All right, so as a way of explaining the work that we've done with Yemi and being culturally responsive, I think that it is really my mission to just be the best I can be for my students. And I was constantly looking for, you know, what kind of a training or an approach I could use to take my teaching level and take it up to that next threshold where I could reach every single one of my students in the classroom. As Luana said, it's about empowering the students, about allowing them to tap into their assets and to bring them in to the discussion. I teach social studies. I have current world issues, our senior class, and AP US history. And it's just the perfect place to apply these cultural assets that our students have to add to the richness and the depth of the conversation. I find that this work is about really designing experiences for our students that will inspire both creative and critical minds. That is my goal as an educator. I want them to be excited about what they're learning and to feel like each day the work we do really matters. I've had some students who just kind of check out in most of my lessons, and I can't really figure out how to reach them, but the work that I've done with Yemi has allowed me to figure out how to reach all of them. And I feel more energized when I'm done at the end of the day, more successful. It's not always perfect, but this work really not only empowers the student, but I think it empowers us as the teacher.
And can I say one more thing too about the not perfectness of it? I think that when we approach our lessons through this lens, students, as Yemi was saying earlier, they know. And if it's a flop, like they still know that you have invited them into the room, that you need them, not that they need you. Like they feel that. And so even if it's not the most perfect lesson ever, or you don't get all the way to your goal that day or the next, I think they know that, and that sort of allows them to come back and come back and come back and push themselves, actually.
So describe to all of us, what has this looked like in Vancouver and particularly at Fort?
So I can go ahead and jump in and talk a little bit about the initial work at Fort and how we got that up and running. Luana and Elizabeth, I'm sure will have more to add about what it looked like, and I know Lindsay has been working with other schools as well. But at Fort, what we did 3 years ago is we identified a core group of teachers that spent a number of days with Yemi, learning about the 6 themes of culturally responsive education, the research behind all of Yemi's work and his experiences, learning about the planning questions, and then those teachers went back to their classroom and designed learning experiences with these ideas and these themes and these questions in mind, and then came back and reflected as a group about the student engagement, about what worked for students, what did that mean for them moving forward. And those were really powerful conversations for those teachers to be vulnerable, to be willing to share what worked, what didn't work, what they were trying to accomplish. And to get feedback and some questions from their colleagues. I think that was a really valuable way to start as a group. And then a number of those teachers were willing the second year, and then we're now in our 3rd year, that they were wanting to invite their colleagues to come into this collaborative planning space along with Yemi. And so we've done that a number of times now, where we've had somebody who is part of that initial core group, and then a number of their colleagues. We've been trying to this last year to really have a whole PLC if possible, because that's been a very powerful experience for them to enter into that co-planning and that space, to have those conversations, to go into 2 or 3 classrooms, to see this learning experience kind of play out and really pay attention to the students and what's working for them, and then to be able to come back and talk about, like, what is this now going to require of us as educators moving forward. And to have a teacher who said to continue teaching the way I was would be malpractice. Like, I need to change what I'm doing. That to have an experience like that, that you realize that not that what you were doing was wrong, but I could be so much better for my kids, and that's what my kids need. So that's been really powerful for us.
Well, I met Yemi a few years ago in a summer training session. It was kind of a whole group session where he really presented some of his kind of big concepts to the group. And I came away understanding that I, as a teacher, needed to start leveraging my relationships a lot more, that I had always relied on those relationships. And it took me quite a ways with most kids, but it didn't take me as far as I needed with all of my students. That still some kids, we were great friends, but they weren't doing much in my class. They weren't learning, they weren't meeting the targets I needed to. So out of that first session, I really started to shift my thinking around using those relationships to allow them to grow as learners. And then we moved into that model that Allison mentioned, where we would plan. And in the first round, we came together and Yemi was there to consult and help me plan. And I thought I designed this great experience, and it was really pretty good. But in the next year, it was inviting other teachers to come in and to work together as a team and to really challenge that design process, to spend a day and then to go into the classroom and teach that lesson multiple times. That allowed me to see what this work really was about. And I grew as a teacher much more in that last year process, in working with my colleagues to push ourselves, to combine content areas has been really successful with our social studies and English classes. And I think that that method is really amazing.
I'll jump in and just kind of talk a little bit about what it's looked like in several of our schools in Vancouver. I have had the honor of working with Yemi at the high school level and then middle school as well as elementary school. And we have done a lot of different things with Yemi. And from the instructional coach perspective, you're like fiercely taking notes, trying to figure out, ooh, how can I facilitate this? And how can I learn from Yemi in this way? And at first it's like super frustrating because he just is so phenomenal that he can accomplish the same outcome and do it 1,500 different ways. But after you get more familiar with the content, you kind of start to realize, oh, I'm never going to be Yemi, but I can do this too. And so we've had so many different ways that this has looked in Vancouver. We've invited teacher teams, whole groups of people to be a part of conversation with Yemi, to hear him speak. We have done residencies. Yemi has gone into classrooms to teach, and we've observed and then debrief. We have had PLCs work together. We've had groups of teachers that are not all content alike work together. And so it has looked different, lots of different ways to go about the work. And yet we, every time we do whatever version of this work that we do, people walk away inspired to continue thinking this way and planning this.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that with what, adding on to what Allison said about vulnerability. I would say several of the teachers that we worked with, especially this year, felt a little unprepared to walk into this work. They weren't sure if they had, what it takes or if they could quite do it. But it really allows teachers to come in and feel that, like, okay, that's okay, and then you just kind of do it. And I think that that's nice because it's a good example. Sometimes we expect a lot from teachers when we bend a lot for students, but we need to know that, teachers growing too, we're constantly growing, we are learners. And just to have that space to be in and to voice our concerns and not feel judged, for those teachers, it actually allowed them to see their students better because they weren't so worried about themselves and how they were being pictured.
Describe how your work has been impacted and changed. And some of you have mentioned these things, but I think it's worth reiterating to the group. What parts do you feel are really taking root with teachers, with building administrators, with the district office, and even as you look across the Vancouver system?
I'll just jump in here real quick again. Working with other teachers, I think one thing I struggled with before was when you're in a classroom and you're somewhat effective, teachers ask you, how do you do it? How do you do it? And you're like, you're just doing whatever you're doing. And it's hard to sort of put to words the things that you're doing. And I think he was able to take sort of the work that he's been doing and actually set up a way for teachers to reflect on what they're doing and building their lesson. I think that one of the vital pieces is teachers often get stuck in, what do I do? What do I do? Give me the tools, give me the tools, give me the tools. And he's very clear on how limiting that is, and how that actually makes it so we're not able to be responsive. You can't respond to something if you're stuck like on a track. You're just stuck on that track. And so I think pulling away from that was really beneficial. Some of the teachers I was talking about earlier, even with remote learning, it's been a struggle. But I was working with a group of teachers last week and they were like, well, we could just take this activity and we could just turn it into like an online experience. I'm like, yes, we can do that. So they're even still thinking forward into this moment on how we can infuse and sort of enhance our students' experience, Yeah.
One thing I would,
Go ahead, Lane.
Okay. Oh, I was just going to add something to that. And did I jump in at the wrong time? I was thinking you were expanding on something, Nasue, but I did want to say that at a district level, one thing we're exploring is the idea of extending the residency. So rather than have perhaps 2 consecutive days, which we've done a fair amount of and Fort focused on over the last year, can we extend a residency with Yemi to longer periods of time so that because he's so effective at helping teachers reflect on their process and unpack the process and really look at what are the results of the process, can we do that in a more sustained way that will produce more enduring results?
Yeah, you know, in terms of building capacity with all teachers in your school to be able to do this work, right? I mean, you saw, obviously, you hear Elizabeth and Luana speak, and they are as good as it gets in the profession. And it wouldn't matter what your instructional focus really was, they're going to do amazing work, right? But I think as a building principal, right, you're trying to think of how are you going to create the conditions and culture in your building so that every student in every classroom gets access to culturally responsive practices, right? And that's going to be the challenge long-term for our school. And Lindsay and I will talk about kind of next steps later on in this piece. But I think that one of the key things as you get into this work that is becoming obvious to me is that if you're going to have learning experiences created within a framework of a mental model like Yemi purports, right? You have to create the ability for people to see that what they're currently doing isn't necessarily being effective at getting students engaged, right? That you have people get in a building, teachers get kind of used to what they do, and that's comfortable. And even if it isn't necessarily getting the results that they would like, one of the results they do get that they like is they have predictability in their experience every day as a teacher, right? And if I do this thing, I'm at least going to get this response. And some of that is I'm going to get the kid who might misbehave to at least be quiet because then it won't cause me discipline issues or whatever, right? And so one of the things that I think you have to do is you have to help people see that if you go through this journey, on the other end is not more work. It's just better results, right? Now there's this knowing and doing gap that you have to cross. People like Luana and Elizabeth, they probably spend the same amount of time planning now that they planned before, but they probably, their toolkit is just more robust and applied differently so that they now think in this pattern. And I think that that is the key for any teacher to be successful in implementing these practices, is they have to be able to take the leap of faith that I'm not abandoning everything that I know, but I am going to develop a more robust toolkit that will allow me to meet the needs of more learners, which is going to be more fulfilling. It's going to make my job actually easier. It's going to increase the number of students who are being successful in my classroom. And so, you know, that's just something that I've noticed so far as I meet with expert teachers like Elizabeth and Luana and others who are on this journey. That I think it's important to have kind of out in this context as we discuss the work that Yemi is pushing us to do in terms of reconceptualizing the pedagogical experience for both the teacher and the learner in this process. So.
Yeah, and I want to add on to even going back to him allowing teachers to be vulnerable. Like they definitely, I would say for the last 2 years, maybe the spread of building amazing lessons hasn't happened super fast, but I think the deeper work sort of that sets that foundation is what needed to happen first, because we have a lot of teachers that we work with that they have huge hearts and they're amazing, but they didn't necessarily see the connection between understanding, like bringing in, I don't know, like why they needed to do this. Like there was just no need. They already work hard. They already do all the things, as Mr. Scheidel was saying. And so why do I do the things I learned I needed to do. But that's the problem with the systemic problem that we have. And it's the way we've been taught as teachers, you know, give all the choices to all the students. And this is more about us thinking about our content. And then actually, I mean, cultural responsiveness, super important, but Yemi also said this is good for like all students, because we really need to, in this day and age, connect why students are doing what they're doing with what they're doing more than ever. You know, with the internet and everything going on, they need that connection to push them forward, to propel them forward, to see themselves in our content area. And teachers need a minute to actually realize that. So those conversations that we're having in our PLCs are actually, I think, for us, and I guess, I don't know, Elizabeth, you can say more about it, but I know in the math department, those conversations have been crucial. Like one thing we've talked about a lot, and I've heard this a lot, is some teachers will be like, well, my kid's not ever going to use this, especially when you get into higher mathematics. I've heard teachers say that, you know, it's really intense and they're never going to use this, you know. So but I like to think about, like, our students don't necessarily need the mathematics. This might be true, but mathematics needs our students. It needs their voices. They need to be part of it, because that is what's going to enhance the rest of our world. Like, our students need to be engineers. Engineers need our students to become engineers. So we're kind of looking at the system backwards, I think. And that conversation has been really rich with math teachers, because math tends to be a barrier subject. You know, it's a gatekeeper, and it shouldn't be. It's this lovely, beautiful art form. And I think sometimes when we think of our content, we think our students need our content, but our content needs their voices. So I think that should drive the culturally responsive piece.
I so appreciate that, Luana, because I think one of the great ideas that this work brings is that every student, if who they are is allowed into the learning experience, if all of their background and all of their experiences and the things that they have brought through them up until we have them in that specific class, if that's allowed to be brought into the classroom and it's honored and it's used and leveraged to increase content knowledge acquisition, then it's beautiful, right? Now we have the ability to have every student have the opportunity to become a mathematician. Instead of just saying, well, let's use these tried and true kind of methodologies, and therefore we'll limit forever the kind of person who wants to be a mathematician, right? And I think that that's the piece that we have to continue to work towards in getting all teachers to understand, that cultural responsive work is about integrating access points. And you said earlier, Luana, floors and low floors and high ceilings, right? One of the great things Yemi teaches is that no matter where the kid is at when they sit in that seat, there is a place, if you plan it well, where they can get engaged in whatever the content is. And that's where we have to increase more and more in every classroom that we have.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to freak everyone out as my Wi-Fi went out. So I thank you for carrying on. What question are we on?
We're deep into question 4.
Awesome. Okay. Are we ready to move on? Elizabeth, did you get to respond?
Well, I was just going to add one little piece that in the planning process, one of the best tools or techniques that I've learned from Yemi is using this idea of allowing students to make connections, but whatever skill or strategy or outcome you're looking for is not only using fun and competition with our students, but giving them multiple chances to approach the target. So maybe approaching the lesson in like rounds where you have, you know, a first round where they produce something. It may not be exactly what you're looking for, but then you can talk about that. You can use other adults in the room to model what kind of, you know, thinking you heard them, or you overheard that was great, or the other pieces that you were looking for. And then in those second and third rounds, it becomes a challenge to produce better work than the other group, be more creative, and it's got this kind of fun momentum that the class will kind of take on. So that's the other piece with planning that I wanted to mention.
You have all kind of touched on this, but again, I think it's worth repeating. How do you really look at growing and sustaining this work? And Kurt, you kind of talked about this too, over a building of teachers, with your colleagues across buildings in a district.
I can go ahead and start out on this one because we've had some discussions. As I mentioned, we had started with a core group of teachers 3 years ago, and then over the last couple of years, those people have been inviting their colleagues in. So we've been getting to more people over time in terms of these formal co-planning and co-teaching experiences. But I know that there are conversations going on during PLCs, just informal conversations, teacher to teacher. So those are a lot of the ways that that work is growing and I think spreading to other people. But I know that we also have now people that have developed the capacity, I think, to do some of this co-planning and co-teaching facilitation on their own. Not that we want to get rid of Yemi, but I think to at least channel, you know, some of those ideas and to be able to support that work even when he's not at the building. I think we've gotten to a place where I think we could try some of that out. I think that's another way to try to grow that and be able to get to more people over time. And also for teachers just to be willing to open up their classrooms and let their colleagues come in and observe and be part of the learning experience. Maybe to have an informal conversation afterward to learn about what was the thinking behind that learning experience, what were those big ideas, how they wanted the students to feel, and to be able to reflect on that, I think would be some really valuable ways to grow the work.
I'll jump in and just kind of talk about, I've thought about this in kind of two ways. The first one is like a plan, like at the district level, we have a plan. We think intentionally about where the work needs to happen, who needs to be part of the work, the opportunities that we offer. So I think in the next question, I'll share a little bit about some opportunities that we've tried to create. So a plan is part of it. And then the second way that the work grows, and this is really the way that has been so fun for me, is just, and Allison talked about it a little bit, but it's, this work is inspiring. So people talk about it. And so we have schools that are calling the district office asking for how to get Yemi to come to their building, or if we can't make that happen, you know, this year, how can it happen next year? We have schools asking for like my support at the district level to come work with PLCs, to come work with communities of practice. And then we have teachers within buildings going to their principals and asking to be the next group that gets to work with Yemi. So it's both. It's this idea that we plan, and then we get to just see how it spreads as people are inspired by it. Oh, Yemi just asked in the chat if we're going to talk about the course we developed, and yeah, I think we'll talk about that in the next question. I don't know if Lane wanted to add any more to this one.
Just a little bit. What I would say is you've heard the passion of our team, and the way that we're going to spread the work is for people to care as deeply as we do about this work. We want to help foster a personal commitment among our colleagues and have those folks, because of their experience, feel compelled to act differently in PLCs, in casual conversations in the hallway, wherever it is. I heard, I think it was 2 years ago, I heard Elizabeth and Luana say, at this point, we need to hold our colleagues accountable. It's, you know, we know what we need to do, and so how do we foster that? And I think that's the key. It's, this is heart work. And so, as Lindsay said, inspiring our colleagues to feel like they need to do this work for our kids.
As Lane said also, it's about inspiring, you know, my colleagues to want to do the work, because I love my students so much, but I only have them for 1 hour a day. And they're going to go to these other teachers' rooms, and it's all about them having a great experience all day long. So if I don't take the time to have those critical conversations with my colleagues, or for example, Kurt and I, my principal, we co-planned a lesson together and kind of shared strategies. If I don't do those things, then my students aren't going to benefit anywhere but just in my classroom, which is great, but I would like it to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
So last question for this part of the lab. What are your next steps?
Well, I think from a school perspective, I really appreciate Elizabeth's comment there about extension of the work, right? That you can't, I really appreciate Yemi's original kind of articulation of our school, right? Fort Vancouver High School Center for International Studies, by most empirical evidence things, people would probably have a, ooh, you've got a lot of work ahead of you kind of framework, right? And that's true, right? We have a lot of opportunity for growth. However, we also have amazing assets within our student body, right? If you look at our demographics, we are like the prime laboratory for being able to make culturally responsive education work effectively, because every teacher at our school has to be extraordinary at this, right? You can't have islands of excellence. And so our next steps are to work together as a leadership team, meaning not just administrators, I mean a leadership team of teachers, right? Luana and Elizabeth are part of a real core leadership team that we have at our school that's really looking deeply at how are we going to make this work happen building wide, right? And to move from groups of people who have some skill sets and are working at this to everybody. And I think that part of how that happens is you have to be very clear in terms of why this is important, right? And holding people to making the pedagogical shifts necessary if they want to be a continued part of the system, right? There's lots of places you can go teach that don't require you to move out of the 1980s, right? But at Fort Vancouver High School Center for International Studies, you have to teach like we have a school that is in 2020. And how do we do that? Well, we have core themes that we're going to ensure that all teachers are building skill sets to do, that they're moving and transitioning from wherever they're at to creating classrooms that are culturally responsive. Now, we're fortunate because we have a framework overseeing all of the work of the school, as we are a Center for International Studies. So, you know, the four key themes there can guide us too, and they all align, right? With this support infrastructure of some basic, you know, kind of teaching methodologies and mental frameworks, such as culturally responsive education, use of avid Wicker strategies school-wide, academic language development school-wide, and strong PLCs with a foundation of climate and culture work, right? I mean, all of that goes together, but the CRE piece is about creating a mindset of individuals where they look at every planning the session they go into individually, right, as a way to increase engagement of students and to access assets and to increase rigor and to ensure that all student selves are brought into it. So I think that that's the next steps for us at our school, and ensuring that essential school leadership doesn't allow for anything other than positive momentum for years to come in each of the areas. And I think we're in a pretty good movement in that direction.
I'll just speak a little bit to what we're thinking about, what I'm thinking about, what we're thinking about at a district level. And I chuckle a little bit at the question, what are the next steps? Because I wake up every morning and I think, well, what am I going to find out today that are going to change my next steps in this current situation that we're in? But what I think is so powerful about this way of being, this way of thinking, is that the 6 themes and the 5 planning questions still apply. Whether we are with our students face-to-face or we are in a remote learning environment, it still applies, it still inspires. And so with that said, we last year, or the current school year, God, it feels like forever, we started 2 kind of blended learning classes for our staff to take part in. And those classes use Dr. Stembridge's book to really get the content out there. And then we facilitated in-person sessions before the closure, and then online discussion forums that talked about just kind of the work. One specific kind of quote that sticks out to me is a teacher posted on the discussion, I've been teaching for 23 years, and this is the first time in a lot of those years that I have felt inspired again. And that was pretty powerful because I felt like I didn't know how the blended thing would go. And so to be able to have that response to a blended learning course was pretty powerful. And I've been talking with Yemi as much as possible during the closure about ideas about online residencies as we move forward. And so we are continuing this work because, again, the mental model still applies. And one thing that just keeps going around in my head is, now more than ever, engagement is vital. And so if we're going to do this remote learning thing well, we should do it well. And this is one way that we can do that. This is the way we can do that. We can think about the work. So I'm excited about some ideas that we have moving forward. And then before I get cut off, I just want to share one thing, one student experience. We were at Fort. It must have been 2 years ago. We did a classroom experience. It was phenomenal. I've cried many, many times thinking about what things that students have said. And we left that classroom and we were at one of our elementary schools, Marshall Elementary School, the next year, and in walked 2 students, one of which participates in the magnet program for kind of education at Fort. And she walks in and right away you could tell that she knew who Dr. Stembridge was, and we made the connection that she was in this class that previous year that had this learning experience, and she remembered it. And her words were something to the effect of, I want to be a teacher like that. And it was just so inspiring to just see the kind of K-12 experience and how it resonates with students and inspires them to be the best versions of themselves.
Wow, you guys. It's pretty awesome. I mean, I just am looking at the chat echoing. We all want to come to Fort. We all want to come to Vancouver. Lane, be the HR director and hire all of us in. Okay, we are going to take a break, but before we do that, did this on the last Leadership Lab, so some of you know the thing. If you could show your face really quickly, everyone, put your cameras on. And if you could just do a big sign language clap for this team. I mean, what they shared was pretty darn awesome. Thank you, Vancouver. Okay, we are taking a break. We are gonna be coming back in about 10 minutes. It's 2:34 on my phone. We're coming back at 2:45. All right, everyone, we are gonna come back here. Hope you had a little bit of a break. We are gonna do some role-alike groups, and this is where participants, you get the opportunity to actually talk and ask some questions. I know it's hard to so the role-alike groupings will work like this. We are going to be in our groups, and your groups are going to be facilitated by one of the Vancouver team. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, thank you. My internet connection is giving me a little bit of a freak out moment. So you will get an opportunity to chat in the rooms with other peers in the same, or colleagues in the same role as you. We are going to have 2 teacher groups. We are going to have just 1 instructional coach group. So Lindsay and Allison, I think you were going to facilitate 2 different ones. You'll come together for 1 coach group. Kurt is going to facilitate the building administrator group, and Lane is going to facilitate the district administrator group. This is a great opportunity for you to dive in deeper with this team, with questions that you have, with information that pertains to your role, how that looks and feels. So we want you to be able to do that with them. It's also an opportunity for you to really be thinking about how you can take nuggets of what they're saying back into your context. So they are going to facilitate those conversations. We're going to be in those role-alike groups for about 30 minutes. You can unmic, or you can unmute yourselves and actually talk. You can also use the chat, and you will go into these Zoom rooms automatically, and there will be a little message when we have about 5 minutes left to go, and then you will automatically dump back into the big room. Yemi, Sue, and I are going to be popping in and out of rooms, so you may see us jump in for a little bit and then disappear. And if you, for some reason, did not get into the group that you want to be in, so there were some of you that classified yourselves as other when you registered, I just made decisions based on your role, or your title, where you would go. But if you would prefer to be in a different room, you can leave your meeting room and we will reassign you. You'll come back into the big meeting room and we'll reassign you. Doing the Zoom rooms, and I'm sure, like Zoom does, the timing is just perfect. Something is about to be dug into and the room ends. But we hope that you got some time with the Vancouver team to ask some deeper questions, probe into their thinking, and maybe even talk about situations that they've encountered about sharing this work that will help you share your work, this work with others. So facilitators, I would love to, we've got some time, I would love to have you share 1, 2, 3 big ideas or thoughts or reflections that came out of your role-alike groups. So I'm going to start actually with the district administrator group. Lane, do you have a couple of reflections or big ideas or topics that came out of that group?
How do we share this? How do we reach more teachers, thinking about what the process looks like to go through a design studio or one of the other ways that have been most effective for us. And just as we were transported through time back here to the larger group session, Yemi was talking about the book study that Allison and Lindsay facilitated, and the way that can serve at a district level expansion of understanding. So our conversation mostly were focused on, especially given now that we know that we're going to be working remotely, and how do we connect these ideas to remote learning for students, those kinds of things.
Thank you, Lane. Kurt, how about a couple of things from the principal group?
broach race in a school where the majority of teachers come from a Caucasian background, right? And do it in a way that is going to decrease barriers to engaging in it, engaging in the conversation emotionally, right? But also increasing authentic engagement to trying to dig deeper into what maybe some barriers are in our own, what we're bringing to the table as educators, and so we can understand better how to help students be successful. So that whole idea of how to broach race was something we discussed. Where to create access points for adults to begin the change process. So just like we want to create access points in our lesson planning with students, we want to do the same thing with teachers and being able to create experiences that are going to allow them to begin to explore more deeply some of the barriers that may be in their current practice they need to evolve towards. And then the last question, I think, was how do you move staff to a place of changing their hearts, right? So what are some of the conditions you have to be able to ensure that the learning process you're going to bring the staff through will be accepted and authentic and actually create change? So those are kind of three big questions that we explored.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, principals. Coaches, Allison and Lindsay, do you have a couple of good nuggets from that group?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a really great conversation. A lot of people that are working hard to support teachers, and talking about, like, how do you design a process that works for your system? Because everybody's context is different, everybody's school or district is different. And what are those key pieces to try to figure out what they can design that will work in their situation, whether that might be peer observations, might be part of that. We also talked quite a bit about just the collaborative process and what that looks like when teachers are engaging in the work together, and how to support teachers. I think oftentimes in a coaching role, you might be supporting an individual teacher, but how do you support a collaborative process with a group of teachers possibly? And then we also talked a lot about what does this look like in our new reality of, the online learning, potentially continuing that, but also the face-to-face in the future. And the fact that this still works in that situation, and those 6 themes and the planning questions, they still apply. And so how do we get teachers to, this is just the way they need to think about their work regardless of the context they're working in.
Thank you, Allison. Lindsay, anything to add?
She covered it. She's a fierce note taker, so she got it covered.
Very thorough. Great. Elizabeth, how about one of the teacher groups?
All right. Well, we had some great questions. It was really exciting to see that everyone was thinking really deeply about how they could kind of apply what we've been talking about in their own practice, in their own classroom. One of the nuggets that came out of the earlier discussion was that one of our teachers believes they really need to help our students see that, they are not necessarily who they think they are, that they can be masters of this subject, that our subjects need them, and that they don't necessarily have to just have the life that maybe is expected of them. And maybe we can shift that vision for our students through this work. Also, that in the planning and teaching model, that one of the key parts of that is the debrief phase. And how cool is it that, maybe when we're being observed, to be able to co-plan and to debrief, and that the observation is really part of that reflection period with our students. Also, the idea that we need to work with our colleagues, that we really need to, as teacher leaders in our buildings, spread this message, and how we could invite other people into this work.
Thank you. And last but not least, Luana, you had the other teacher group. Some thoughts from that group?
We kind of discussed some of the tools that that Yemi has in his book, and they're like thinking tools. So they're not necessarily, I mean, he has other tools in there, but the majority of it is how you think about your lessons and how you craft them. And so we talked about sort of the dream exercise, and how that's a really nice filter to pull us out of the moment and the year, and projects us 3 to 5 years ahead. And we also talked about that triangle of the student and the teacher and content and that relationship. That's where we are cut off at the very end. But just sort of like how we use these thinking pieces to really flesh out what our lesson is going to look like. And then we had a nice comment that I put in the chat, actually an empowering comment. Emily said, it's nice to have a way for us to have power over changing the system. It's hard to wait for top-down change. And we had a really nice discussion that sometimes we're like, it would be great if everything came from above, but really we're the ones that have access to our students. So our ability to affect change is almost greater in that moment. And so we had that discussion as well.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for engaging in those role-alike discussions. We're going to finish off the rest of this leadership lab with some opportunity to engage with Yemi. He gave me 3 photos of him and told me to pick one. No, I'm going to put all 3 up here. And somebody in the last leadership lab commented about he's got bow tie skills or something. It was very cute. Anyway. So Yemi, I am going to let you share your screen. I'm going to stop my share and you can go ahead and use it. And if you have any reflections based on going in and out of the rooms and from what you heard the Vancouver team talk about, that would be great.
Okay, so I will share my screen, but I also want to encourage you, if you got a question, let me hear your question, and I'd be very happy to respond to your question. So, a couple of things. You know, for me, right, like, I've been thinking about this, you know, what's working for kids for, it's been about 13 years in this, you know, as a PhD, you know, working with different school districts. And I always tell people, right, like, just imagine if you had 13 years to be in spectacular teachers' classrooms with the purpose of learning from them about what's working for kids. Like, just think if that was your life for the past like 13 years, like that's been my life. So the things that I've learned, I've read the literature and I've taken my own coursework, but you know, at least half of what I think I know about what's good for kids in terms of cultural responsiveness, I've learned it in classrooms. I don't know if you can still see me, but you know, this is you know, one of the great books in the culturally responsive education canon. And in Dream Keepers, that's what Gloria Ladson-Billings was doing. So the themes and the questions, right? I mean, they are research informed, but really for me, I've given myself permission to prioritize the research that jives with what I'm experiencing in the classrooms of effective teachers, and then just trying to share that with as many people as possible. So I do want to, Luana was talking about the dream exercise, and in that room, just in the interest of fairness, I want to put this screen back up. This is in the book. I forget what pages it is in the book. This is not my creation. This, I credit in the book, came from The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. And well, actually, it came from the University of Virginia's Center for Teaching Excellence, which Chip and Dan Heath wrote about in their book, The Power of Moments. And what this has helped me to do is it's helped me to guide teachers to identifying the essence of the learnings that we want for our kids. When we do that, we're probably less likely to impose our implicit biases on what it is we're teaching and the learners that we're teaching. We're more likely to see the true learning target, this big idea that we want kids to still have a hold on 3, 5, 10, 15 years from now. And this also gives us, I think, better opportunities to leverage kids' backgrounds in their engagement. This is it's a more authentic target that allows kids those opportunities, those invaluable opportunities to say, oh yeah, this makes me think of, and oh, by the way, right, like a lot of times, and particularly when we're talking about students like our Fort Vancouver High School students, a lot of times they'll make their connections through jokes. And they'll see something that strikes them as funny because they can make a clever connection, and then they'll do it, and they'll say, oh, they'll make this clever connection, they'll do it thinking that they're going to disrupt your teaching. But this is when you get to be what I call a pedagogical, you practice your pedagogical judo and use the momentum of their joke, which is an attempt to disengage, to deepen the connections that all students can make to the true understanding. Now, here's the thing. If you've got a learning experience that is not responsive, that is focused on your students answering X number of problems on a worksheet, you can't do anything with that joke. And it offends you. It offends you as a teacher, right? You're insulted that this child would interrupt your masterful teaching. But when you are clear about the big knowing, then you have an opportunity to tell a student, tell me more. Where's that connection come from? How do you see this connection that you're making fitting into a larger schema? And that's often when kids are able to see themselves in the learning much more authentically. So I use the dream exercise as a subset of questions for the first question. What do you want students to understand? When I do this, what I tell teachers, and teachers tell me back, I feel more powerful when I design my learning experiences like this, because it gives me more latitude. I have multiple approaches that I can take to the knowing. A lot of times I'll take something that a kid says, and before I provide the academic language to the concept, I'll just use the kid's language. And I'll say, oh, well, it's like Luana told us, right? Remember. And then, I did this once as a teacher. Now, when I was doing it as a teacher, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I was just fighting for my life, right? Just because I taught in a real tough school, and I'm just trying to, stay sane. But I had this one kid who, we were reading a novella by Richard Wright called The Man Who Lived Underground. It's kind of crazy that I remember that detail. And it was very much existential literature. And I had a kid who was like reading it, trying to make a joke. And he was like, it's almost like none of this matters. It's almost like, the universe just doesn't care about you at all. Like you're completely disposable and everything is reckless and random. And you're just like this speck trying to work your way through existence. And I was like, that's an interesting way to put it. And then I named that concept after the kid. And it was probably like a week and a half later where I told him, other people have thought about that too. They call it existentialism. We call it the junior concept. They call it existentialism. Same thing. As a matter of fact, let's flesh that out. And then what I used to do, again, had no idea what I was doing, right? I hadn't figured out yet how to teach. I was just fighting for my life. But then what I would do is every time someone came into the classroom, I'd make Junior explain his concept. And he got better and better and better at explaining it. Now I can do that more as a matter of course, because I know clearly what it is I'm teaching. And what I'm teaching is not necessarily the isolated skill of the content standard, although that's the second bullet. What are they still able to do? So it's not that we're excluding the isolated skill of the content standard. We're putting the isolated skill of the content standard in a larger context that makes that skill more relevant, more meaningful, more personal. A kid can put it in their social and cultural terms. They can put it in their language. And when I get a kid to do that, I got traction. Now I can continue building. And then here's the other beautiful thing about this is it gives me the chance to learn more about the student's social and cultural identity. I'm going to share a couple of things with you. I'm going to share an article that I just had published in the Ed Week Classroom Q&A blog on things that teachers can do, schools can do to support African American students in the school closure crisis. And in the article, and I'll share that link. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second because you people don't need to see all the everything on my desktop because some of you are very judgmental people. And though I always remind you, when you judge me, you're hurting your karma, not mine. So, am I still sharing? All right, stop sharing. So I have this article that came out, and in the article I'm saying, what are the things that schools can do to support African American students? Well, let's be careful and let's be clear about why we're asking that question. We're not asking that question to checklist and stereotype African American students. Because African American students, like Latino students, like Asian students, like any other group of students, are not a monolith, right? There's a wide, expansive range of experience under that African American umbrella. And yet, if we're thinking about what's working for our most vulnerable students, then that means we're probably also supporting well our students who we would expect to be successful in school. So we have to be careful and clear about why we're asking the questions about specific groups. And this, I think, plays into some of the conversation I had briefly with the Fort Vancouver leadership team. When we bring our students into when we bring our teachers into these conversations, we gotta be thinking intentionally about how these challenging conversations about identity are useful to them in the design of learning experiences that will yield more engagement. Lindsay's heard me say this 1,000 times. I have this teacher who I was working with, white woman teacher, did a residency with her. We're in the classroom, we're planning, we're teaching together, we're reflecting. And I had about a week, I think I had a whole week to spend with her in her classroom. It was just me and her in her classroom. Other people were coming in and out, but it was the two of us. And like in my residencies, there's often a night that we end up staying late at the school. And that's where we start having one of those really intense, those conversations about race in which we're being vulnerable. And I always laugh about this because this was a teacher who my sense was that she was reluctant to engage in conversation around race at the beginning of our work. And then like on that Wednesday or Thursday night when we had that marathon conversation, she was really exploring the roots of her racial lens and where her ideas about race came from. And I remember a couple of things that she said to me. One thing that she said to me was, it's just two of us. She said to me, I've given myself permission to I've given myself permission to exclude myself from some race conversations because I'm a white woman who works in a predominantly non-white school. And I've given myself permission to say, well, clearly I'm not a racist and I don't have to engage in these difficult conversations about race because I'm a good person and I work with students of color all the time. And now I'm realizing that because I work with students of color all the time, I'm more responsible for doing the work of exploring my racial lens so that I'm not unconsciously, inadvertently marginalizing my students. That was one of the things she said to me and I was just like, huh. And the other thing she said to me was, she said, she was recalling and understanding how many harmful ideas she learned from her grandmother about race. And this is where I always joke, and I'm always like, I don't care how good professional development is. I might think that, but I'm not saying nothing bad about my Nana to anyone who doesn't call my Nana, Nana. But it spoke to me and it confirmed that when teachers feel like this conversation is useful to them, and then when they can see the evidence of increased student engagement, a teacher who's worth our effort will lean in. They'll lean in and they'll realize this is not like this extra hurtful thing that I have to endure in order to be a better teacher. This is something that's essential to being a good teacher. All right, I want to make sure, I want to pause and I want to, questions, thoughts. Lorraine says 123, so page 123, is that, I guess that's the dream exercise. All right, so if you have a question, I'll pause. If not, I'm gonna keep going, but I'd love to be responding to a particular question.
I don't see any questions yet, Yemi.
Let's give them about 30 more seconds. Okay, listen, in your, on your screen, at the bottom of your screen, you see a participants icon. If you click on that participants icon, it gives you the opportunity, you can raise your hand, I'm pretty sure. It did for me earlier, it's not, I'm not seeing it now, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. In the chat box, I want to put a couple of things in here.
If they hit the three blue dots on the right, they should see raise hand in the participant.
3 blue dots
So
on the,
at the bottom right, there's 3 blue dots.
oh, okay, okay. Yeah.
And then
Okay.
raise hand is in words there.
Okay, I don't see anything right now. Do you see anything?
I don't think you see it, Yemi, because you're a co-host.
Okay. Like I said, if there's a question, I'm happy to hear it. While we're waiting on that, so I just put in the chat room something I'm going to ask you not to share broadly. So don't like post this on your social media channels. You can share it with colleagues, or if you want to use it for professional development purposes, that's fine. That's a video podcast of a middle school learning experience that I worked on with 2 middle school ELA teachers. A school very much like a MAC in Fort Vancouver. In VPS. What we did there was we redesigned, we revisited the idea of book club. And we put more of the ownership in the students' hands and gave them tools for how to manage their own book club. So if you want to see how a PLC has used the mental model to design a unit of learning experience for their kids, that's a great way to do it. Okay, and I see a question from Amy, and I'm going to get that question here in a second. Let me just also add this link that I'm putting in right now. This is to the Ed Week piece, short piece, 1,200 words. Things that teachers can do to support African-American students, things that schools can do to support African-American students. I think when you'll read this though, I think this is very much apropos for African-American students, but I think that this is also something that is useful, something useful to think about for any vulnerable group of students. All right, I'm gonna add some more things there. So Amy says, our school is putting together an equity team just now to start thinking about next year. Where do you suggest we start? Okay, so what I would say, I think that's a great question. So what I would say is, you start with a core group of your ambassadors for the work. You start with a core group that you want to build up a certain amount of capacity in, and they have to kind of have two characteristics. They have to be willing, so they have to be willing to lean into this conversation. With the understanding that, any conversation that yields growth is at different points going to feel uncomfortable. So people who are willing to lean into these uncomfortable conversations. And then here's the other thing that I think is really important as far as an equity team. They have to be people who are respected in the building. So it can't be the teacher who's writing, 10 referrals every week. It's got to be the teacher who folks are viewing as credible, particularly in terms of their pedagogy. And I think that that's one of the things that we did well at Fort Vancouver High School, and that's also something that we've been talking about in some of the other VPS schools as well. And, you know, what I would say, and I hope this doesn't sound, you know, self-serving, but what I would say is that one of the great ways to do this is to use the book, CRE in the Classroom. I always tell people, right, like, don't go just to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is the chapter that the publisher made me write. That's the chapter about the teaching strategies. And many teachers will go straight to that book and they'll go straight to that chapter, right, just looking to go to the shortcut. But I built in a little trap. I tell people in the chapter, if you've come to this chapter without reading other chapters, you might be a terrible person. I've gotten like 50 emails, people like, oh man, like, I had no idea you were gonna call me a terrible person. I'm like, just fix it and go back and read some of the other chapters. But what I would suggest in building an equity team is look at chapter 3 and just start with theme teams. Read chapter 3, look at the themes, assign the themes to different parts of your team, and then have your members who are assigned rigor, for example, to teach the rest of the team what it is we mean by rigor and why rigor is a CRE theme. And that can be a great way to anchor your equity team in content that's going to allow your team to share this message in terms of equity and pedagogy. Speaking of which, something else I want to share just real quick here. And I see there's another question. I'm going to get that question too. I'm going to put a link here. This is a link to Karen Hess's Cognitive Rigor Matrices. Read in the book, read how I talk about rigor, and then use this link with these different versions of the Cognitive Rigor Matrix to unpack what it is we mean by rigor and why rigor is an equity issue. What I can just tell you right now in short is, and I'm going to share my screen here in a second, as soon as I find the slide that I want. Okay. All right. So this version that you're going to see, this is a watered down version of the matrix. But the point that I make in the book and the point that teachers need to see is that the more rigorous our instruction is, the more engaging it is. So when you have a classroom where there's not a lot of engagement, a lot of times teachers end up giving those classrooms worksheets. And the idea is, I'll give you the most thoughtless assignments possible in exchange for your silence and compliance. And that's never a long-term solution. The kids know exactly what's happening. They'll never trust you if you give them work that they don't see and experience as rigorous. So what I always tell my teachers is, the less engaged the classroom is, the higher the rigor the learning experience needs to have. Less engagement, more rigor. So what Karen Hess has done here, if you're looking at the screen, is she's married Bloom's taxonomy with Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. And so again, read in the book, look at the matrices, go level 4. In level 4, this is what we mean by high rigor moments. If we got our kids thinking at that DOK level 4, they have to draw on their identities in order to be successful. You cannot mail in your thinking if your thinking is asking you to make connections with the content and the world outside of the content. Okay, so that's something else. And then let me go back here and see if I can get the question. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then get my question. Okay, so I hear we're reading Milner right now, but after, okay, well, so yeah, and I got a lot of respect for Richard Milner. I think Richard Milner's work is great. You know, I try to be real careful about throwing shade on other people, because I think that there are a lot of people who are, I like Zaretta Hammond's work a lot. There is some work that's trash. There's some trash out there. And if it feels like trash, my advice would be bail on it. because some of the hardest work that I do is coming in behind less than thoughtful equity work. And people have kind of dug themselves in. But I think Milner's one of the good guys. I work with beginning educators. Do you recommend doing this work with a cohort of strictly beginning educators? Absolutely, 1000% yes. Because beginning educators are less likely to have developed those bad mental habits that can be so difficult to unlearn. Now, some of beginning educators are also a challenge though, because their experience as learners, right? They're drawn to the teaching profession because they were so successful as learners themselves. And some of them have not really ever had a truly rigorous learning opportunity. They've just been really good at following directions. And so sometimes their expectation is that their students will also follow directions in the same way that they did. And they have to reconceptualize what it is we mean by rigor and engagement. So that's part of the challenge, but I do think that it can be really useful for beginning educators to be exposed to this way of thinking early in their career. Now, again, that's not to say that veteran teachers can't get this too, but with veteran teachers, what you have to do is you have to center this work around their questions. So you must make sure that you've identified what it is they want to know about equity, and then you are presenting your equity work, your CRE work, in response to their questions. I think this is, so in the residencies and in our design studio, something that I'm always doing is I'm always looking for what I think of as potentially strengths of the teachers. And then just like we do with our students, we have to build on those strengths of the teachers, but not in that inauthentic, you know, silly way, the way we talk to our students' parents sometimes. You know how we talk to our students' parents, we got a kid, we want to blast that kid, and then we'll tell the parent like one superficial thing that we like about their kid at the beginning of the meeting. You're not fooling any parents when you do that. You know that, right? You're never fooling any parents when you do. They know exactly what you're doing. They know that you're setting them up to smack them down with all the things that you don't like about their kid. So it has to truly be authentic. And what I try to do is I try to put teachers in the position where their strength is more useful to them when they have packaged it with one or two of the themes or really done a deep dive into some of the questions. All right. Are you still looking at my screen? You're not looking at my screen anymore, are you? Okay. And then there's one more thing that I wanted to share, and then I'm also open and available to any other questions. Wait a minute. I felt like there were 4 things I wanted to share. Oh, well, no, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else that I wanted to share. But what I want to do is, again, if there are any other questions, I'm just looking to see. I want to also make an invitation. I meant to do this morning. I'll do this. I'll send an email out to the morning group. I'm starting a book club, and the book club is going to focus on the intersections of equity and innovation. And we're going to start by reading this book, a book that I first read in 2010, and I'm rereading it now, Change by Design by Tim Brown. Tim Brown is one of the, I don't think he's a founder of IDEO, but he is one of the lead thinkers of IDEO, which is a design thinking firm. They help organizations create more innovative approaches to meeting their clients' needs. So this is going to be, we're going to look at this book with our equity lens. And if you're interested in that, I want you to email me, and we're going to find a time that that works for people. We'll probably have, you know, about 15 to 20 people or so in a group, and kind of figure out how we can get together on a regular basis and unpack that. So I'm kind of like looking at my notes. I mean, I got tons of stuff here, but
wait, Yemi,
yes.
15 or 20 people is your maximum?
So does that seem like a lot or a little?
No, you've already filled it up right here. Are you going to do another one?
You can't promote this to anyone else.
I'm not going to share this broadly. Hey, everyone, sign up now. Email him now. I'll put his email in there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we'll see, right? We'll see. I mean, what I want is I want a group where people are going to be engaged, you know, and where people are going to feel, you know, compelled to stick around and be in the group. So, you know, we'll see. 15 to 20 is what I'm thinking. I also want to make sure people get a chance to speak and be heard. You know, what we're doing at this moment is we're trying to figure out, and I see Luana's got her hand up. We're trying to figure out how do we move these ideas from our pre-COVID residency work into our post-COVID next normal. And so, yeah, you know, I don't have all the answers for that. I will say this, and I'm coming right to Luana. Something that I'm spending a lot of time doing right now is I'm watching YouTubers who are really engaging, and I'm asking myself, when do I feel most engaged watching these people? And when I feel engaged, what do I feel compelled to do? And I'm studying these people, and I'm trying to figure out how I can translate some of what I'm learning from these YouTubers, these engaging YouTubers, to our virtual learning spaces. Right now, two that I really like are this dude named Alex, the cooking guy. He's a French dude. He does these cooking podcasts. They're amazing. They're great. And then another person that you may have already heard about, the podcast is called, or the YouTube channel is called Smarter Every Day. So I would say check those two out, but then find your own. And then again, what you want to do is you want to investigate your feeling of engagement. Luana, was that a hand for a question?
No, I was just going to say, maybe you could talk a little bit about your first of the 5 questions, because in our room we talked a little bit about like tapping into what the students feel, and you sort of just now started to do that too, but how that fits into student engagement and pulls students into the experience.
Yeah, thanks a lot. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again here, and I'm also looking at our time. I know we're running out of our time here. Okay, so, oh wait, I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it like this. Okay, so all right, are we looking at the same thing? So this is a graphic that comes from, oh man, I lost my place. Okay, this is what I want to see. Okay, are you looking at the 2 concentric circles? Okay, cool. This comes from the work of Mary Helen Mordino-Yang. And when I saw this and really started studying her work for the first time, it really changed a lot of, it kind of changed some of my confidence in pushing for affective engagement. And one of my favorite educators is, oh man, I'm drawing a blank on her name, Stanford University, Nell Noddings. Anybody ever heard of Nell Noddings? She's still alive. She's like probably in her 90s now. And she was a Stanford University researcher and professor. And she spent like 35 years talking about love, the value of love in classrooms and a loving context for learning. And what I think Mary Helen Mordino-Yang is doing in her work is providing the neurocognitive rationale for prioritizing, emphasizing loving spaces and instruction. And so when our students feel connected emotionally, what we learn now about the brain, when we light the brain up in neuroimaging, and we see our students, we see brains thinking deeply, the regions of the brain, the sectors of the brain that we associate with emotion are lit up. And what we've learned is that emotion and cognition, these 2 things that we used to think of as kind of separate and apart from each other, are actually intricately connected and self-sustaining, self-supporting. So when you ask that question, what do you want your students to feel? Really what we're asking is, what's that affective context that allows for rich, meaningful cognitive connections? And so what I will also do, this was the fourth thing. See, Luana's reading my mind. I'm going to add in the chat room a link to this article. Actually, I tweeted it out for the morning group, but I'm going to add the link here for you guys also. So if you want to see this article, and you know, she's a neuroscientist, right? So I'm convinced that many neuroscientists don't think that their writing is good unless half the people reading it don't understand it. But but she began her career as a teacher, and so I do think that she makes her work more accessible than the average cognitive scientist. So I'm going to find this link.
Yemi, while you're finding the link, I know people are having to peel off. So I just want to do a couple of quick follow-ups. We will send an email with an evaluation about the Leadership Lab. We appreciate your feedback because it helps us get better at this work, and especially in this virtual platform, your feedback is very welcome. In that email will also be clock hour information and links to the Leadership Lab recordings. We'll send you the one if you did not attend or couldn't attend the one in the morning. We'll throw that in as well. And then a Leadership Lab can be used as a way to engage people in sharing for any kind of content or topic. So I'm going to just send a link to kind of a how-to to do the Leadership Lab. There's no magical way about it, but there is magic in the way you bring people together to share about something that's pretty cool. And then Yemi is on Twitter and does a lot of sharing that way. So his Twitter handle is at the bottom here, and I suggest you all go and follow him. And if you have any questions, please holler. I want to give a big round of applause to the Vancouver team because they are awesome. And I feel like if you were at the Leadership Lab this morning and could also join this afternoon, there were so many connections that you heard repeated from the morning that Vancouver talked about in the afternoon. And it was a very nice, I thought, setup of a new district that's exploring their work with him, as opposed to Vancouver, who's had this journey with him for the last 4 years now. So again, I'm going to stop share. I would love for you to turn your cameras back on and give a little round of applause for all of those Vancouver peeps. For Yemi Stembridge, thank you, Yemi, for sharing your day. Sue Anderson, thank you for being here. Yemi, do you have any final words?
No, I would just, for the bottom of my heart, I would truly say thank you for all that you're doing, because I know how challenging it's been since March 13th. And let's just continue to hang in there. And I would love to be able to continue this conversation in whatever ways that we're able to. So again, if you're interested in the book club, I do need you to send me the email. And then I'll put you on our distribution list, and we'll start figuring out a time to meet and dig into our text. But thank you all very much. I appreciate you.